happened? Let's get straight to Dean Reynolds. He's joining us from Chicago to talk more about this. Dean, you heard the superintendent there say that he believes, and the detectives believe, that Jussie Smollett carried out this as a publicity stunt because he was dissatisfied with his salary. And he says that Jussie Smollett took advantage of the pain and anger of racism to promote his career.
Yeah, I have been covering Eddie Johnson, the superintendent of police, for a few years now, and I have seldom heard him as angry as he was today. What he said was a mixture of contempt and disgust and basic anger at what has unfolded over the last some weeks since this attack was reported. One of the things that stood out to me, as it did you, is that, why did he do it? Why is Smollett accused of orchestrating this? And you see from his words that it was this dissatisfaction with his salary. But then there was this other comment that the superintendent made about this now, I suppose, notorious photograph of Smollett in the hospital, his face sort of puffy and with a scratch on his cheek. And Eddie Johnson said that's most likely a self-inflicted scratch. I don't know, where do you go with this? It's kind of boggles the mind to understand what and why you would do something like this. All of the man hours that were wasted on a bogus attack, looking at all these surveillance cameras, going meticulously foot by foot through the areas to look for stores where any of these things could have been purchased, and then finding out, actually, as Superintendent Johnson said, in the 47th hour of the 48 hours that the two brothers, central to this case, were detained. In the 47th hour of that detention, they finally broke and told their story, which spun the entire investigation in a different direction. Now, in conclusion, the superintendent said that he was asked, does Smollett owe Chicago anything? And he said he owes Chicago an admission of what he did, and he owes the city an apology.
Yeah,
Glad?
Yeah,
indeed. So now what I'm thinking about, too, are these two brothers and how they got mixed up in this scheme. We were talking earlier, Vlad, and we were kind of sort of trying to figure out, was he actually attacked by these brothers, or like what was the role of these brothers? And of course, Dean, back to that question, why on earth would they participate in an alleged scheme like this?
Well, it sounds like chump change to me. I mean, $3,500, but they are free. They are witnesses to a crime. According to their attorney, they manned up and did the right thing. I suppose you have to question their judgment to go along with this at all. They knew Jussie Smollett. I don't know how well they knew him, but they were willing to go along with it. And as we learned here in this press conference, they were talking to each other. Even after the incident, when they had taken off for Nigeria for a few days, Smollett was talking to them. Not particularly intelligent when you think about what detectives would be looking at, but that's what happened.
Dean, the other point that I think that is important to point out to our audience, if they're just joining us after listening to the superintendent of the Chicago Police give that press conference, is I think there was a question, and it was hard to hear some of the questions that was asked to him about whether or not that there was a sense from Jussie Smollett and the actions that he took that he was treated as a victim early in the investigation. And the superintendent said that we treated Jussie Smollett, they did have reservations, they did have their doubts, as did you, as did many other reporters who were covering this story. But At the moment, for the record, he was a victim, and he was treated as such by the Chicago police, who did everything that they could in their power to find what he said were the perpetrators of this, now we know, fake act.
Well, we should also say that Jussie Smollett says that he's a victim still, right? So these are still allegations put forth by the police and the prosecutors. Right. He says that he has been a victim of a hate crime, Dean.
Yeah, he does, and I think, Vlad, you're correct. I mean, you know, how else were they supposed to treat this, at least initially? I think he said they had questions. Naturally, they had questions. They wanted to find out what happened. They wanted to solve the crime. And so the more they asked questions, as they would, I mean, these are trained detectives, the more questions they had. That's the way it works sometimes. But the superintendent was pretty adamant in saying that resources were not taken away from other investigations, specifically like murder investigations or something like that. They devoted a lot of energy to this, and I think implied that a lot of the devotion of resources had something to do with the devotion of resources by the news media in covering this and giving it such great attention.
Yeah, he did say, he said, you know, we treated this case the way we treat all cases of this manner, but it got national attention. It superseded everything else that's happening in the city of Chicago because of national attention. He even, Superintendent Johnson referenced, Dean, presidential candidates who made statements, and they didn't use the word alleged. They basically said that this had happened, and you could hear the anger in the superintendent's voice. They executed over 50 search warrants to try and find what exactly happened to Jussie Smollett. That was a statistic that the superintendent gave us. And he said, and I quote here, "I just wish the families of gun violence in this city got this much attention," Dean.
Well, and he also made the point, too, that it sort of harms the credibility of legitimate victims of hate crimes when they report them to the police. Not that the police will be skeptical, but that it sort of colors the whole issue when you concoct a story that had at its base race and gender. No wonder he said it's shameful. He said it was despicable.
Yeah, he says, my concern is that hate crimes will now publicly be met with a level of skepticism that previously didn't exist.
Dean, thank you so much.